So far, we've learned that a house fire on McClung Road in LaPorte, Indiana, resulted in the deaths of 4 people, 1 woman and 3 children. After digging on the property, revealed that the widow who owned the property, Belle Gunness, was not a victim after all, but a cold-blooded killer. Within a few days, 5 more bodies were found buried on the property, with a total of 9 people losing their lives there. Will there be more to be found? Welcome to Episode 3, Murder Hill. Overnight, Belle Gunness's name went from heroic mother trying to save her children in the fire to a demon and a murderer. The newspapers were having a heyday with all of the articles that were now seen all throughout the country. The papers were saying Mrs. Gunness is thought to still be alive. The date was now May 6th, about a week after the fire. As Sheriff Smutzer drove up to the farm, he had trouble maneuvering around because of the enormous crowd that had been gathering around. There were men, women, and even children waiting to get a glimpse of something. The number of spectators there were well into the thousands. Digging that day began in the northeast corner, about 5 feet away from where the 4 bodies were found previously. Very quickly, they hit something, and that horrible smell again filled the air. About 3 feet down was more dismembered bones and rotting burlap sacks. After taking a brief break, more digging resumed, and a few feet away from this dig revealed more than a dozen pairs of men's shoes. Under the shoes lay a huge pile of human bones. The bones were being hauled to the buggy shed that was the temporary morgue. With the new corpses found and the 4 the day before, the total seemed to be at 9. The newspapers from New York to California had nicknamed Belle Gunness in their headlines, from a modern-day Lady Macbeth to the LaPorte Ghoul to the human vampire to Lady Bluebeard to Queen of Crime and Hell's Princess, along with many other names. On Tuesday, May 7th, the digging was put on hold because of the rain. Sheriff Smutzer had traveled to Chicago that day to meet with his counterparts. While he was still away, Joe Maxson caught 2 men breaking into the locked buggy shed where they were keeping the bones. Because of the heavy rain, Maxson could not see their faces very well, and their hats were pulled down far over their eyes. Maxson yelled out that the sheriff had orders that no one was allowed in. One of them told Maxson to mind his own business and that they were doctors and had a right to go in. Joe Maxson immediately sent a neighbor boy to town to notify Deputy Antis. But by then, the men had gotten away, running into the woods. Rumors quickly spread that Belle had sent those men to destroy evidence against her. They stole several bottles of what contained poison and mixed up bones of the skeletons to prevent identification. It turned out, though, that in the end, it was just curiosity by 2 residents of Michigan City wanting to see the bones close up. Later that day, around 1:30, before Smutzer's return, LaPorte received 2 young men by train, brothers Matthias and Oscar Budsberg. The reason for their arrival was to view a human skull thought to be their father, Ola Budsberg. Ola Budsberg was a 51-year-old widower from Iola, Wisconsin. 14 months earlier, he told his sons he was taking a trip to LaPorte to see about managing a farm. However, he told his brother he was going there to marry a wealthy widow. In March of 1907, he left Wisconsin and returned a week later to sell his farm to his son Matthias for $1,000. On April 5th, with cash from the sale and a mortgage note For another $1,000, he left by train. He promised his sons he'd write as soon as he was settled. The following day, a cashier named J.W. Crumpacker later testified Mr. Budsberg appeared at the First National Bank of LaPorte in the company of Belle Gunness and requested that his mortgage note be sent to the Farmers State Bank in Iola for collection. He was back with Mrs. Gunness on April 16th to pick up the money. Crumpacker said, "That was the last time I saw him alive." Just as Asley Helgelien was concerned for his brother, Matthias was concerned enough for his father and sent a letter to the Gunness farm. It was eventually returned as undeliverable by the Dead Letter Office in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the mortgage note came due, and J.C. Swenson, a cashier at the Farmer State Bank in Iola, sent a letter of inquiry to Crumpacker asking if he had seen anything of Mr. Budsberg lately. Crumpacker passed on the letter to his employer, President Buck, who took it upon himself to drive out to the Gunness farm. Belle answered the door and answered questions, leading Mr. Buck to believe she did not know where he was, and said Mr. Budsberg went to Chicago for a visit and was robbed of most of his money, and when he came back to LaPorte, he packed up and was headed out west to try to make up what he was robbed of before any of his relatives should learn of it. She said she took him to the train depot and he headed to Oregon, and that was the last she'd seen of him. Mr. Buck and Mr. Crumpacker notified the bank in Iola. After the fire and the discovery of all the bodies, Mr. Crumpacker sent newspaper clippings to cashier Swenson. He then notified Ola Budsberg's sons. At around 2 p.m., Deputy Antis drove the brothers out to the Gunness farm. Even though it was raining, 22 men were gathered around the buggy shed, aka makeshift morgue. They had heard about the break-in earlier. Antis led the two brothers into the morgue. Matt and Oscar's nightmare had come true. They identified their father by his unmistakable mustache. The front page story in the May 7th New York Times gave their readers 4 theories. Theory number 1, that Mrs. Gunness, fearing exposure of her long murderous career, killed her 3 children and herself, setting the house on fire to conceal the crimes. Theory number 2, that Mrs. Gunness, fearing exposure, fled after killing her children, putting the headless body of another woman in the house to mislead authorities. Theory number 3, that Ray Lamphere, her farmhand, did the killing from a double motive of revenge and jealousy. Theory number 4, that the quadruple crime was committed by a murderous gang with headquarters in Chicago who feared exposure by Mrs. Gunness of a long series of murders for insurance, she being used as their clearinghouse for corpses. So far, we have 2 men positively identified in the crimes of Belle Gunness, Andrew Helgelien and Ola Budsberg. Stay tuned for more identities being revealed in Part 4 coming soon. Thank you. Like and subscribe if you find this interesting, and hit that notification bell to get all updates.